in moments ago. The Pentagon identified those 2 soldiers who were killed in Jordan. First Lieutenant Tyler James Feehan, a 25-year-old from Hawaii, and Private Isabel Gonzalez, a 19-year-old from Texas. President Trump spoke about the losses.
Well, we feel very badly, but, you know, those great people, those great patriots were out there fighting that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Iran has been very, very badly damaged. They've lost everything almost militarily.
Where we are in Iran, because there are no glib, easy answers. We can't cut and run. The MOU that gave Iran $500 billion is a non-starter because they proved they couldn't even be bribed. But it's going to be very hard to fight out of this corner. Where are we? What do we do next?
You can't really talk about their sacrifice without talking about where we are in this conflict. And I think we're at an inflection point here. You can see that the Trump administration is accelerating and expanding their strikes, now hitting military infrastructure, railways, bridges, that kind of thing, trying to really put economic pressure on the IRGC and the military there in Iran. The question is that going to be enough to force the Iranians to the table? And you have to remember that the folks that Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner are talking to are not the folks in charge of the drones and the missiles. The IRGC still runs all the military there in Iran. So it's going to be it's an open question whether this additional pressure is going to force them to the table. And if it doesn't, I can assure you that the U.S. military is preparing for even more expanded attacks and a return to what they would consider major combat operations. I don't think the president wants to go there. I certainly don't think those who may be considered moderates in Iran want to go there. But I don't believe that the IRGC is particularly concerned about that at this point.
That entire charade was when he released the documents that said 2 things. Number one, the Russians were trying to influence the campaign to help Donald Trump become elected president of the United States. And number 2, that when enemies of America want to disrupt democracy, what they do is they start spreading doubt about the fairness of elections. Again, Donald Trump calling himself out. I'm not saying he's an enemy of democracy. I'm just a humble, as you know, state school, dumb country lawyer. I'm saying in these documents contain intel assessments that if foreign powers want to undermine the United States' confidence in democracy, then what they will do first is they will try to undermine their confidence in fair and free elections, which is, of course, against all evidence what Donald Trump has been doing since 2020.
So, Joe, this was an amazing spectacle, really. For people who didn't watch Thursday night, the president was really, almost shouting. He was making the wildest charges about election fraud and deep state conspiracies. It's the kind of thing that you see online in very intense blogs and sites, but you don't hear that directly very often from the president. But he said, if you want to check this out, go to whitehouse.gov and look at the intelligence documents that I've just declassified. So over the weekend, I took him at his word. And I thought, okay, I'm not doing anything else Saturday other than watching England massacre France. But I did read these documents, and it's extraordinary, Joe, that if you look over them carefully, they rebut almost everything that the president said. A key part of his case was the Chinese tried to defeat me, intentionally went out to defeat me in the 2020 election, which obviously he still can't get over. He can't believe that he lost. So it must have been the Chinese. And you look at the intelligence assessments that were produced, which he's, thank you very much, supplied, and you see that the consensus judgment of the intelligence community was precisely the opposite, that the Chinese did not decide to intervene to defeat Trump. They thought about it, but they decided against it. There were a few analysts who disagreed and thought the Chinese had done more, although not everything they could have. They were given separate space to make the argument. It was kind of a classic snapshot of how our intelligence community actually works. If this is a deep state, man, it moves at the speed of a snail. They go week after week debating sentence by sentence. So it couldn't have been more different from what the president was arguing. And I think it was wonderful, in a weird way, that he invited us all to look at the actual material. When he makes charges so often, we scramble to fact check them. In this case, the President provided the fact-checking glossary right there, whitehouse.gov. Thank you very much.
This has been one of the deadliest stretch of days since this war began almost 4 months ago, really ratcheting up the cost for Americans, but also deepening the quandary for President Trump. And the death toll does appear likely to rise. CENTCOM saying that it's still working to identify remains that were found at the site of that attack on Jordan. They say that 2 service members had been killed when they came under attack from Iranian missiles and drones. We also understand that there was an additional death in northern Iraq over the weekend when a service member was working at a controlled detonation of unexploded ordnance. Both of these incidents, I think, underscoring that Iran really does retain missile and drone capabilities that perhaps President Trump may have been underplaying over the last several months, but also seems to have the ability to evade U.S. Air defense systems. Really comes amid escalating exchanges between the two countries, both sides going after increasingly sensitive targets, including civilian infrastructure. Last night, CENTCOM saying that it carried out the 9th straight consecutive night of attacks on Iran. And I also understand from U.S. officials that additional American firepower is heading to the region, including F-16 jets, F-35 jets, as well as additional aerial refueling tankers, all now heading to the Middle East. It's all, I think, led to some anxieties as you see these increased attacks by the U.S. on southern Iran, that perhaps President Trump could be preparing for some sort of ground invasion. And certainly the president is at something of a strategic crossroads here as he determines which way to go amid this escalating conflict with Iran. Of course, these deaths, I think, just reiterate that the U.S. doesn't actually need ground troops in Iran in order for positions in the region to be at heightened risks. Those troops that are arrayed across the Middle East now coming under fire from Tehran. At the same time, you hear both sides not ruling out the prospect of diplomacy. You had Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, say this morning that the door remains open with Iran for negotiations. He said Iran had communicated, quote, directly and through multiple channels that they were open to negotiations. You also heard the foreign minister from Iran, Abbas Araghchi, say that negotiations could begin, quote, when you have achieved reliable battlefield and strategic gains, suggesting that there could be efforts, even though they're sort of difficult to detect at the moment, that both sides are trying to find a way to draw down before this conflict escalates into something that neither side is able to contain.
Not giving him the opportunity to resolve this. They're not opening this straight. He faces bad choices. You sat with chairmen, with presidents in the Situation Room. What kind of advice would you offer to a president who clearly feels he's just stuck in a terrible dilemma?
The problem is largely in Tehran. The IRGC and the moderates, if you want to call them, are not communicating and not on the same page. And as you well know, David, the IRGC doesn't have perfect command and control over all their leaders in the field. And so the difficulty for President Trump is he's trying to manipulate this escalation in a way that, again, encourages the Iranians back to the table. You probably noticed, or maybe you haven't, in the press releases that CENTCOM is issuing, they're now putting in the hour at which the strikes are beginning, and they're adding in the hour at which the strikes are ending. That's unheard of. We never did that before. They're doing that as a message sending. I think that's what that's about. That's about trying to encourage the moderates to get the IRGC on board. That's what really needs to happen here, because until that happens, or until the Supreme Leader actually exerts some leadership over the IRGC and reins them in, I really don't think the president has very good options here for an exit ramp. And I agree with you. He wants out of this. I think you can hear the Secretary Rubio yesterday talking talking about the door being open. I think they really do want to find a negotiated way out of here. And I applaud them for that. But until the Supreme Leader can get control over his own system, I just don't know how we get there.
How long does that take, Admiral?
I mean, it could happen in a moment if the Supreme Leader decides to exert that kind of leadership, or he's willing to push back on the IRGC. But I don't see any indication that he can do that. I mean, it could happen relatively quickly, and I think they want it to. You'll notice they're starting to reposition forces now. CENTCOM's already starting to move extra aircraft in. They are getting ready for a return to what they consider major combat operations, and that could take this to a much wider war, escalate it in very dangerous ways in the region, and then finding an off-ramp is going to be near impossible.
You think that once Donald Trump is gone, it's the end of MAGA? I don't know if it's the end of that sort of attitude. I mean, the MAGA is the closest thing to the modern version of a Nazi party. This is America's version. It's the closest thing without the Holocaust and all that stuff. That sort of mindset. That's what MAGA is, because most intelligent people or logical people, when they get new information, and if that information is negative or not factual, then they change their minds. They go, oh, well, I wish I had known better, and now that I have this information, then I can readjust. No matter no matter how many facts and how much information you give them about this presidency, about the policies, they don't change their minds, because they're really not voting for the price of eggs. They're voting for white supremacy. They're voting for power. They're voting to have a preeminent voice. They're afraid they've been co-opted by many people in the Republican Party and Donald Trump to think that their failures are due to something else, the other, the black person, the woman, the Latino, the immigrant, the migrant. That person is taking your job. That person is the reason that you don't have the financial or career success that you think that you should have. It's because of them. We want to take our country back. That's what MAGA is.
Monday, 20 July, Year of the Lord 2026. We're going to kick off the week. We've got Jim Rickards going to be here to talk about the geopolitics of it all. John Solomon joins me. John, we're going to go to break here momentarily. I want to hold you through the break, but I'd like you to respond to David Ignatius. You know, he's from the Langley Bugle, formerly known as Bezos, Amazon, Washington Post. He's really the comms department for the deep state. Address his charges that if you actually listen to the president's speech, which is the biggest attack on the deep state or government entity in the history of the country, but if you actually go to the receipts tell a different story. Your thoughts?
Used to work at the Washington Post, as you know. I scored quite a few front page articles when I was there. And a lot of David's colleagues used to call him David Ignoramus, not Ignatius, but Ignoramus, meaning he was ignorant. He would write whatever talking points would give him. So let me give you two examples before I address what he claims about President Trump, so you see the pattern. January 4th, 2017, the FBI cleared Mike Flynn of all wrongdoing. They were going to close down the case. The next day, Barack Obama, January 5th, 2017, on the way out the door, has a meeting in the White House to figure out how they can trip up and hang an innocent Mike Flynn for something he didn't do. And 7 days later, David Ignatius is the guy that gets the leak on a perfectly legal call between Mike Flynn and the Russian ambassador, Kislyak. So he was wrong. He was helping the deep state smear a man who had just been cleared by the FBI. That timeline is in the documents I've made public personally. In 2020, he came out in the middle of the John Durham report and said, the Senate Intelligence Committee proves that there was a collusion racket going on between Donald Trump and the Russian Federation. Then a couple of years later, under the Biden administration, the Justice Department put out the Durham report saying there wasn't one iota of evidence. That's his record. When we come back from the break, I'll literally address how he's an ignoramus on this story.
Sure. Short commercial break. John Solomon starts us off with a rebuttal of the Langley Bugle's comms department, David Ignatius. Birch Gold, take your phone out, text Bannon, B-A-N-N-O-N at 989898. Get the ultimate guide from Birch Gold for investing in gold and precious metals. Got a lot of tremendous feedback on the Saturday show, my hour or 45 minutes with Philip Patrick. Make sure you talk to their team today.
An amazing spectacle, really, for people who didn't watch Thursday night. The president was really, almost shouting. He was making the wildest charges about election fraud and deep state conspiracies. It's the kind of thing that you see online in very intense blogs and sites, but you don't hear that directly very often from the president. But he said, if you want to check this out, go to whitehouse.gov and look at the intelligence documents that I've just declassified. So over the weekend, I took him at his word. And I thought, okay, I'm not doing anything else Saturday other than watching England massacre France. But I did read these documents, and it's extraordinary, Joe, that if you look over them carefully, they rebut almost everything that the president said. A key part of his case was the Chinese tried to defeat me, intentionally went out to defeat me in the 2020 election, which obviously he still can't get over. He can't believe that he lost. So it must have been the Chinese. And you look at the intelligence assessments that were produced, which he's, thank you very much, supplied, and you see that the consensus judgment of the intelligence community was precisely the opposite, that the Chinese did not decide to intervene to defeat Trump. They thought about it, but they decided against it. There were a few analysts.
They thought about it, but they decided not to. We've got two graybeards with us. Rickards is going to give us the geopolitics of of what's happening in the Middle East as we ramp up 9 straight days of bombing. John Solomon's here to talk about the even David Ignatius, John, and folks, particularly those new to the show. David Ignatius, senior reporter over at and columnist at the Washington Post, but known as a mouthpiece of the deep state, of the worst elements of the CIA, always gets things wrong. But I want to directly first off, he did make a point that I think is missed. What the president did in the actual speech from the East Room on Thursday night was extraordinary. That has never been done before in American history. Yeah. Then he declassified documents, never done. Just walk me through the first charge of Ignatius, that he was shouting, and this is things you see like in shows like
I was
The
in
War
the room,
Room, but online. Go ahead, sir.
I was in the room. He wasn't shouting at all. In fact, he had a little bit of a hay fever going on. And so he was actually a little lower voice than normal. It wasn't like his rally voice. He was serious. And every word he uttered, I just want to point this out again. The CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and the Homeland Security Department vetted and said it was accurate before he said it. So when David Ignatius, mouthpiece for the government, says that the president was lying, he's accusing the foreign intelligence agencies of lying. But I want to take ignoramus and morning snow job to a new place. Let's go to right where they belong. He's exactly right. If you read the 2020 assessments, absent the fact that what was removed from them, what wasn't in them, was the proof that China had hacked into and obtained the voter files. That's what they say. But the second you realize that what the president said is, hey, in 2020, they kept this out of the 2020 assessments, but had they put it in, this would have amounted to election interference. I'm going to tell you today, under the definition of the intelligence community's the definition of election interference, President Trump, for the first time, proved that China interfered in the 2020 election. Now, it wasn't in the 2020 assessments. That was part of his story. But let me read it to you. Page 3 of the October 16, 2020 NIC report does something that the intelligence community seldom does. It gives us the actual definition for election interference. By the way, a lot of the boobs in the media think that influence is a lesser charge and interference is a more serious charge. It's the other way around. Interference is only a part of election influence, which the intelligence community considers more serious. But I'm going to read you the definition because it's the first time in my 40 years in reporting I saw the intelligence community define it this way. Quote, election interference is a subset of election influence targeted at the technical aspects of the election, including voter registration. Just keep that pinned, casting and counting of ballots and reporting of results. The president, for the first time, provided evidence that China was targeting and successfully acquiring illicitly voter registration. The president actually proved election interference by this definition on Thursday. And David's right. in 2020, all those buddies at Langley and NSA, they suppressed this from the report. Had this been in the report, they would have had to admit it. But Donald Trump put the evidence that was missing from those 2020 reports. David Ignatius has no response for it because he had to ignore this. He had to go on Morning Joe and ignore that level of detail to make his snow job case this morning.
Also, this whole concept that you could buy commercially, what you buy commercially cannot be actually manipulated. It can be used for analytics, but not manipulated. The reason they hacked it, the reason they have this whole special unit of cyber hackers now coupled with AI, as I warn people all the time, is that they go to get the voter files so they can hack it so they can actually manipulate. This is why people in Georgia show up and they go,
That's right.
I'm here to vote. And they go, well, hang on, you already voted. And they go, what are you talking about? I didn't vote. This is what the CCP does, coupled with the 278,000 illegal aliens or aliens that are here, non-citizens that are here that just in 4 states. You notice Morning Joe never discusses those two aspects of this, sir.
He can't. He can't because the figures are too big for him to explain away. Let me get to a very important point about this. And I think it's essential for people to understand what the president laid out on Thursday night and its significance long term. Yes, you can buy election data. You're not allowed to use it to influence election. The second you do, you're actually violating the law. But more importantly, what you buy commercially is not what the Chinese got. Most states don't sell the date of birth. They don't sell the driver's license. They don't sell the Social Security number. They don't sell other personally identifiable information that the NSA and the CIA determined that China had in its hands. And by the way, in 2022, China confirmed that a CNE, that's an exploitation expert, it could be a person, it could be a whole unit, unclear to me, and that might be classified still, so I don't know. But whoever it was, they were directly hacking in and hacking the information. That tells you that they went and got the data that's not commercially available. That's exactly what happened in Great Britain in 24. And Joe Biden charged the Chinese actor in Great Britain for hacking. I wonder if the Trump Justice Department doesn't now go back and charge this CNE, this person or unit that was doing it in 2022. That would saw off the limb that all these silly media reporters are hanging on to this morning. Yes, they bought commercial data. Then they went and hacked the stuff that you couldn't get commercially. And we have the proof of it. And all of that constitutes and meets the definition of the intelligence community's, what the intelligence community considers to be election interference. Donald Trump, for the first time, did what the intelligence community failed to do in 2020. He proved election interference by showing that China had targeted our voter registration data, just like that definition says.
There's 2 tracks. Number one, and we obviously don't disclose where you're going, but generally, what's the direction of the task force, particularly on this topic? I know there are other topics. People don't realize the task force is a broad mandate on declassification, but just on this topic. And at what point, now they're talking about attaching the SAVE Act to a CR to force the Senate. I mean, I'm not saying they're gimmicks, and I realize Brand and the team over the White House are trying to look at every alternative on the Save America Act. But on those 2 things, directionally, where are you heading on this topic? Number 2, what needs to be done now immediately to make sure they can't steal the 2026 midterms, which is their intention, sir?
Yeah. So first off, the release Thursday night caused more people to come forward to the task force and divulge new things that we're trying to get our hands on. And we're working very quickly to declassify that new evidence related to elections. We're looking at many other things. If Americans want to prove all the fake news media wrong, all the people that you showed in your clip this morning, tomorrow morning they could just simply call the Senate and bring the Senate's phones to a halt. There could be millions of people, if they wanted to, call the Senate and say, I don't believe NBC and CNN and ABC and all those who told me there's nothing there. I know there's something there. Pass the Save Vote. Imagine if millions of people started calling the Senate switchboard tomorrow and brought it to its knees, what impact that might have on all these senators who haven't taken the time to learn what you and I are talking about here. Third, I think when you listen to what Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen described, you have fixes underway. If you can get these patches into the computer system, great. If you can get new identity measures to make sure a Chinese person can't register with your information or cause other trouble with your information, that's a great thing. And then finally, I think now the Justice Department and the FBI have a new suspect, a new potential defendant they could indict to create accountability. That C&E went unpunished because it was kept out of the intelligence reports. Whoever that person or persons are, the Trump Justice Department, the Trump FBI can do to that what Joe Biden did to the Chinese for hacking Great Britain while keeping us in the dark about our own hack. Those are 3 accountability measures that I could imagine happening in the next few weeks.
John Solomon, where do we go to keep up with all of it? And you're still coming in and helping pinch hit. Amanda Head is anchoring the show. You're coming in when you can. Where do people go for all your content?
Yep. Jay Solomon reports on social media. JustTheNews.com is a website. And I'm lucky enough to follow you every 6 o'clock on Real America's Voice with Just the News, No Noise. I've made most of the shows. I did miss Thursday. I have to admit I missed Thursday ahead of the speech. But we'll be on tonight. We'll be talking about David Ignatius and what a dishonest job these reporters are doing. It's shameful. If you just compare how they covered Joe Biden's announcements on China hacking with how they covered Donald Trump, you will see the double standard and hypocrisy that all those networks are using. They're committing fraud upon the American people. Maybe we've been looking at the wrong agency. Everybody says FCC. I wonder if there isn't a fraud standard to be pursued at the Federal Trade Commission. Those reporters are lying to the public using a public license. I think that's worth looking at the Federal Trade Commission.
Wow. John Solomon, you're breaking a little news here. We'll look forward to seeing you at 6 and a deeper drill down on David Ignatius in the Langley Bugle. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you starting here.
Thanks, my friend. Good to be with you.
The task force buried lead right there. Other people are coming forward. So there's going to be a lot of whistleblowers, a lot of new information. Task force continues on. Bill Pulte, Wild Bill Pulte, is continuing to hammer away at DNI. Okay, we're going to pivot. Jim Rickards, who's been kind of right about this entire thing, particularly the escalatory ladder, next.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back. The Morning Joe, and the reason they kick off with this today is, and over the weekend, you tell, the mainstream media and the Democratic establishment and the radicals are absolutely panicked by what the task force under Solomon, and I've got to give a special shout out to Bill Pulte, because look, Solomon's been doing this forever. He's been doing this for 40 years. Okay, he's one of the most experienced guys in town, and he has deep connections. Plus, the task force he's got around him are some of the best people President Trump's ever had that understand the deep state, have worked inside the intelligence agency. So he's got a task force, and they're grinding. There's going to be more revelations. There are more people coming forward. And you see how Ignatius has got to lie about what's in the documents. I recommend you go to the documents. The problem I've got with the documents, they're too redacted, but I understand this is about sources of method. And this is how the administrative state and deep state push back. So you can't see more information, but it's a start. No president in the history of this country, the closest it came was General Eisenhower, the supreme commander in Europe that had, and then wrote the book Crusade in Europe about the ground war, and I guess the air war too, in Europe, particularly Northwest Europe in World War II, warned us about the military-industrial complex. That gets played over and over again now. At the time, it kind of went over people's head, but he had seen it from the inside and warned about it. It's the first time a president from the White House had ever sat there and say, hey, here's a problem. You have, and this is what I said, it's about who governs. Where's the center of gravity of sovereignty in this nation? Who governs? President Trump's address to the nation on Thursday night was historic and will be looked at as historic. Now, you have to take action after that. My recommendation on China is, because we're the leaders of the anti-CCP movement in this country, they should immediately pull all the visas for the kids coming here and study. I mean, we should do it for AI. And you see right now that the White House, the Axios has got a piece of that. The White House is starting to, I think, listen to things we're saying about the CCP and what's happening with these artificial intelligence models. And David Sachs and the tech bros, the oligarchs, are all in a tizzy because they want it both ways. They want to get the money for funding China, and they want to have totally no regulation to do what thou willst in this. But you've got to face reality. There's no messaging. There's no surrogate program. There's the War Room and there's a couple of others that are driving this. But what evidence is so overwhelming that it's got legs of its own, but no official kind of response. I think it's Natalie Allison at the Washington Post. Lead story, if you go to the website, is a story about the official GOP response to President Trump's speech of the night, and they're hiding. And let me be very specific. She cites Whatley. Whatley had a campaign. This guy's down in the polling. I don't know. The public polling's got him 6, 8, 9 down. I hear there's internal polling getting worse than that. I can tell you, talking to many grassroots folks down in North Carolina, there's zero enthusiasm. Let me rephrase that. There's less than zero enthusiasm for Whatley. He just hasn't initiated a spark because they say this guy's not really MAGA. Now, he was put in there because of everything he had done on the election side in the RNC, which was really nothing, zero. Filing a bunch of lawsuits that you lose is not action. And in that, they tell Whatley had, I think he had an event on Friday. This is a guy that's way behind, needs grassroots enthusiasm. They did not mention once President Trump's address. Let me repeat that. A guy running for the Senate in North Carolina who is behind, and everybody will admit behind, and I think behind by a lot, has an event and talks about community safety, all important things, very important things, but doesn't mention this. The official response of the Republican, and this is the donors, they don't want to talk about it. What they want to talk about is affordability and economics. And I keep saying, what do you mean talk about affordability? It's action. People either know their lived experience and it's either getting more affordable and there are more opportunities and things are turning. You can't sell them on it. You come out and talk every day about it. It's white noise. It goes in one ear out the other because people's lived experience is going to inform them of what their beliefs are of what the cost of living is. And nothing the Democrats can say can change that. People are not like, I just don't believe people are mesmerized or it's been some sort of psyop. So you have to talk about issues important. The issues that are important, we're going to get Poso up in the next hour, is who governs and what's the true nature of the enemy here. Now, Marco Rubio and people are running around now, and there's a huge story in Politico. It's all about they're going to scare him. It's the scare him election. Because now you've got Republicans jumping on, and they don't know what they're doing. They're running around, oh, my God, the communists are going to come over, take over tomorrow. It's much deeper than that and more serious than that. And you're not acting like you're serious people. Why are you not acting like you're serious people? Because you're not getting down to issues to be competitive in a midterm election. It is about turning out your base in droves and also getting the lower information voters that are part of your base that maybe skips midterms to be enthusiastic. That comes from inspiring grassroots leaders. That comes from getting people fired up. One of the top issues is the stealing of elections. And you just put it out there that the 2020 election was stolen. You just got to read the documents and connect the dots. And this is why what Pulte's done, Pulte should be kept as DNI, because I thought Jay Clayton was underwhelming in his performance. The establishment Republican Party loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. I just don't think that Jay Clayton's going to make the change. He's going to be confirmed, and he's going to be the next DNI. It's just about when that happens. And I think you can make a very compelling case. You need Pulte as kind of the wingman. You got a task force that's driving, that's got people that are seeing. You got Pulte, who just happens to be somebody who is who has instincts for when stuff you can't coach. He has instincts of what's right or wrong. What he did at DNI has never been done before, and he did it in 3.5 or 4 weeks. And so not only is he a patriot, I think he's put his life in jeopardy, but he's just doing an amazing job. I hope and wish the president would keep him there for at least a while longer. A while longer definition, I don't know. Let me pick a random date. How about through the midterm elections, right? And I think there's got to be messing on the information. The president had a historical address. I would put it in the top 2 or 3 addresses that the president has ever had for the gravitas of content. And I would certainly like to see a messaging plan, a surrogate plan, because we knew many people in the White House did not want him to do this. I'd also ask, why is the White House not at the tip of the spear for changes that have to be done in elections today? What is holding up? I think I know. And once we know, because I don't know, but I know, we'll be making some revelations on that. Okay, let's pivot now. And by the way, Garland Favorito is going to be here. So out in the hustings, I've talked to all the people involved in all the different states. We're going to get Jim Hoft and his team up. Not this morning. When we get Hoft and his team up, doing Michigan. Garland's going to join us and others, but Garland today in Georgia. But let me pivot to so Rickards. First off, Rickards, you kind of know these folks. You were there for a while. Your assessment of President Trump's address, the gravitas of it, and let me hear your feedback on David Ignatius, the comms director for the deep state for the Langley Bugle, sir.
Yeah, I mean, first, I agree with you that this was historic. The revelations were very deep, very powerful. I think John Solomon did a great job of explaining it. And by the way, John Solomon always does great reporting, but there are these little nuggets that are even more valuable. When he said FTC, light went on. I mean, I've done a lot of litigation. I've been up against all these agencies, SEC, IRS, Treasury, FTC, or whatever. And a lot of them are constrained, meaning IRS is tough, SEC is tough, but they have rules. The FTC has one of the broadest mandates. It's kind of like, what's unfair? Well, you tell me. But the point is, it's a very powerful agency. It's kind of underutilized in a lot of ways. So that was a really, I think, very telling point. I hope the White House follows up on that. But yeah, I used to drive from Langley over to DNI headquarters. Nice people. I wasn't sure what they were doing, but the DNI was created to deal with the fact that in 9/11, the CIA had half the puzzle, the FBI had the other half of the puzzle, and they never talked to each other. So they said, instead of solving that problem, they created another layer of bureaucracy. So I don't know what the point of that was. But that's what that 2004 Intelligence Act was all about. But Ignatius is a mouthpiece. I mean, David Sanger at the New York Times is a little better, but they're just propagandists.
Talk to me. You've had a number of called shots since you came in here about a month ago. You say, "Hey, look, I don't see this MOU working. I think it's kind of a travesty. It does everything we don't want to do, like give the Persians a bunch of cash and take restrictions. It kind of ends economic warfare, and goes and it really depends upon their tender mercies. That has not worked out. You said, "Hey, look, the only thing you're going to see here is an escalatory ladder. That's what's going to happen. This is going to escalate." So now that we've done 9 days of bombing. And I want to play this clip real quickly because I think Admiral Kirby, I think he's got something we've been talking about with you now for a couple of months. Let's play the clip from Kirby on Morning Joe.
The opportunity to resolve this. They're not opening the strait. He faces bad choices. You sat with chairman, with the presidents in the Situation Room. What kind of advice would you offer to a president who clearly feels he's just stuck in a terrible dilemma?
The problem is largely in Tehran. The IRGC and the moderates, if you want to call them, are not communicating and not on the same page. And as you well know, David, the IRGC doesn't have perfect command and control over all their leaders in the field. And so the difficulty for President Trump is he's trying to manipulate this escalation in a way that, again, encourages the Iranians back to the table. You probably noticed, or maybe you haven't, in the press releases at CENTCOM.
As we've said, he shattered the command structure of IRGC, and you've gone down the food chain, and they're actually more hardcore because obviously they have to impress their masters. We got about a minute on this side, Rickards. Your thoughts on Admiral Kirby, what he's talking about, and we'll hold you through the break.
Yeah, I think Kirby's probably right about this division between the IRGC and now it's a younger crowd. They killed the 70-year-olds and the 60-year-olds, but they got a lot of 40-year-olds who were really post-revolution, meaning 1979, and really much more hardcore. So I think Kirby's right about the distinction, but my reaction is, so what? Ask yourself a simpler question. Who's in charge? The IRGC is in charge. So the fact that there's another group out there is interesting data, but irrelevant because the IRGC is running the show.
Well, then you're saying, okay, we're going to hold you through. I want your answer to this on the other side. What President Trump is trying to do for a diplomatic solution or negotiated solution is deal with moderates. And you're saying, although the command structure of the Revolutionary Guard may be shattered, they're still in charge because they ultimately make decisions because it's a military police state, correct?
Yeah, that's what we've been saying, and we've said it all along. That's why we are where we are.
Okay, hang over a second. Jim Rickards is going to stick with us. And I've got Garland Favorito from Georgia that's going to be with us too. Okay, we got a ton of specials from our sponsors for you. HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Steve25. For the 250th commemoration of the birth of the nation, they're giving you 25% off the $1 million triple lock protection for 2 years. Talk to Natalie Dominguez and the team today. HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Steve25. Talk to Natalie.
Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, Jim, it's 9 days of bombing is going to continue on. They're trying to drive people back to the negotiating table. I think we're now actually hitting infrastructure in addition to military installations. They're expanding their hits, not just in the Persian Gulf. They've taken out a couple of our troops in Jordan, and people are starting to ask the question, why in the hell we have bases in Jordan? Why we have the bases in Iraq? Why are we all spread over hell's half acre in the Middle East? It's time to bring them home. Rubio actually said getting on the plane to go to Asia today to talk to the Asian alliance that we're not the finally just said, hey, we're not the policemen of the world. Thank you, Senator Rubio. Since as Senator, you were one of the big guys that pushed, we were the policemen of the world. Glad to see that you're finally seeing the light. So what is then the president to do, sir?
Well, Steve, when you're out of good choices, you have to go to the bad ones, or at least the hard ones, and that's where we are. So I'll just go through this really quickly. The way you do this analytically is you have hypotheses and you test them against facts as they play out. So there's not going to be a deal. The deal that Trump would accept, which is basically the MOU, which wasn't horrible from Trump's point of view. You reopen the strait, we stop bombing, and we keep talking about everything else, panels of experts and all that. Iran said, yeah, we'll do that. They start blowing up oil tankers. So that didn't work. The deal that Iran would accept is, give us $70-80 billion. We take the strait and you get out of the Middle East. Trump's not going to accept. So it's not going to be a deal for that reason. So then you get into where we are now. I call it escalation, but where we are right now with the escalation is a forever war. So we're bombing bridges. They have more bridges than we have bombs. We're going to run out of ammunition sooner than later. One thing that Pentagon did that was really smart, there have been some dumb moves, but one of them was really smart. China, we're back to sort of, Mahon and Mackinder, but China has been building overland routes in the heartland, railroads coming out of Xi'an and Chongqing to Pakistan and Iran. And you can move oil by train. This is why some years ago, Warren Buffett bought the Burlington Northern Railroad because he knew they weren't going to reopen the Keystone XL pipeline. And you just get tanker cars, and it's a moving pipeline on rails. Well, we started blowing that up. China wasn't happy, but too bad for them. So that was a smart move. But basically, you could take Carg Island, but what's the point? We have a good blockade. The blockade works. It has consequences, but why take over Carg Island when you've got an effective blockade? So that's what we're doing. But it's non-sustainable. Again, you're back to refined product and jet fuel and everything else. We're starting to run out of all those things very quickly, and you'll destroy the global economy. So escalation has a short-term feel-good aspect, but it won't work. So when you go through all of that, what's left? Well, what we're going to do, in my view, is my estimate based on these analytical methods, we're going to take the HEU. We're going to go get the highly enriched uranium. Because if you do that, and by the way, that's a high-cost exercise. I'm not making light of it. But if you do that, I call it Operation Aztec. The Aztecs used to rip the beating hearts out of their victims. You rip the HEU out of that, then who cares what Iran does next?
But you're saying, hey, stand by. You're going to see a commando or Navy SEAL or Army Rangers, but somehow you're going to have actual combat troops, special forces in there to go collect it.
But that would be division level strength to have a security perimeter, Army Corps of Engineers, maybe the CBs, special operations, air power, intelligence.
This is not.
Surveillance.
This is not. If we provided air power, this is not something America's greatest ally could do, which they noticeably have been kept out of this escalation of the war, sir.
No, Israel doesn't have. The U.S. does, and I'm not saying it's low cost. There will be casualties. I'm not even advocating it, but I'm not an advocate. I'm an analyst. I'm saying this is what, in my view, is going to happen, because it's the only thing that can happen that will end this and basically avoid a forever war.
The denuclearization part. You've got a special. People want to get your thinking. You've got this newsletter that is kind of iconic. Right, it's been around a long time. Strategic intelligence, which is based upon predictive analytics. You've got a one-time good deal for the War and Posse. In honor of the 250th, you and your staff who thought it up, or you, is brilliant. $17.76. $17.76 for 3 months. If you don't love it, they contact you, say, "Hey Jim, I just don't love it. I want my $17.76 back." You do that, and then you move on. So it's a one-time good deal, sir?
That's exactly right. Thanks, Steve. It's at rickardsintel.com. Rickardsintel.com is the landing page. We started this at the 4th of July, but it proved extremely popular. So $17.76 for 3 months. It's a big issue. It's we put 9,000-10,000 words into it. There's a lot there. I write all the lead articles, and if you don't like it, within 30 days, call us up. We'll give you your money back, and you can keep the bonus reports that come with it, which are very valuable in and of themselves. But the fact is, most people do continue. They sign up for a year after that, and it's extremely popular. So rickardsintel.com, $17.76, 3 months, and we hope people enjoy it.
Jim, I want to, this is a dynamic situation, as we say, about this war with the Persians. I want to make sure that I can I'll reach out to you later in the week for an update, because you've been, unfortunately, you've been dead spot on, and we are where we are, but it ain't getting better. Jim Rickards, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
1776. Garland Favorito. Garland, I'm going to keep you through the break, but first, you got to go pretty far in the woods to hit Garland Favorito's tripwire. You just put out a fiery press release from Vote GA this morning. We're going to get it up. What pushed you to put out this fiery press release on a Monday morning?
So, Steve, we analyzed the coverage over the weekend, and it was, and we knew a little bit about what was going to be in the president's speech, but the coverage, we had 3 of the networks that didn't cover the speech at all. 2 of them cut the speech, and then they distorted.
I think we've lost his hookup. Okay, we'll get Garland back up in a moment. Garland actually used the T word. That would be treason. Pretty big for Garland Favorito. We'll get him back up. Posobiec, Rosemary Jenks, a bunch of rumors out there about, shouldn't say rumors, actually a fact about an agriculture bill that gives amnesty to agricultural workers. Don't think that's going to happen, but we're going to talk about it. That is a reality, but we'll talk all about it. Chapter. The data company that deals with your helps you with your Medicare has saved War and Posse over $1 million so far, and they've got you into the optimum programs for you. Just take your phone, 845 War Room. Couldn't be simpler. A hotline just for the War and Posse. 845 War Room. Check it out today. Colby and the team over at Chapter. It's free, no obligation, and they're saving you big money.